CMIE, the Centre for Monitoring of Indian Economy, has put out a report saying 21 million salaried jobs have been lost between April and August this year. April, of course, around the time the lockdown started until now. Now, this is particularly worrying and particularly scary because the non-salary jobs might come back, but salary jobs take a lot longer to recover. And salary jobs are tied to EMIs, to welfare of families. And salary jobs is largely middle class. A lot of the data that we've looked at, specifically from CMIE, tells us that not only are these salary jobs, but the worst hit among those are young people. And to help us understand how grave this situation is, I'm joined right now by Mr. Mahesh Vyas. He's the Managing Director and CEO of the Centre for Monitoring of Indian Economy, CMIE, that's been putting out all of this very helpful data. Mr. Vyas, good evening and thank you for speaking with me. It's a pleasure to have a conversation with you.
My pleasure to be on your show, Faye.
I want to first start with this number, 21 million. We've not seen as much concern, unfortunately, from government. But to a layperson, to an ordinary citizen, 21 million salary jobs is staggering. I want to understand from you if you've ever seen numbers like this in all the time you've been tracking jobs in India.
No, never. Let me admit first that we have been tracking the labor markets only since 2016. So we are relatively young in monitoring this. But I have been looking at the government data also, which is of the past many decades, and I have never seen anything of this kind before. Never seen a 24% fall in real GDP. Like shaving off of 1/4 of our income is unbelievable, or was unbelievable till now. But 21 million salary job lost is a very serious matter. It's really a lot of jobs lost because this is on a base of 86 million jobs. So mind you, of 86 million jobs, you lose 21 million jobs, you lost a lot, and they don't come back, as you rightly said, they don't come back very easily. The graphs that you showed and you're showing now shows the decline in salaried jobs. Mind you, almost every other graph shows a V-shaped recovery, shows that red line coming back. This is the one that does not come back. So you look at people who are daily wage earners, business people, farmers, the works, the overall labor participation rate, the overall employment rate, it's all V-curve everywhere. But the single sore case is that of salaried employees whose losses are continuing to increase. So I think this is really distressful.
Mr. Vyas, if I take you back to that first chart that we were looking at with the, with the precipitous drop, that really shocking drop, really. I also want to ask you about the first half of that chart, which I understand is April 18 onwards, where it's actually steady. It's not going up, it's not going down technically. But if we consider the 5 million people who look for jobs additionally every year, that was already a bad situation where we weren't adding any jobs even before COVID happened. So we've accumulated a bad situation going into COVID, haven't we?
That is true. So salary jobs have remained more or less stable right from 2016. So for 5 years, there has been no increase in salary jobs. There has been no increase in jobs at large, in the sense that the total pie, total number of jobs has also remained very constant, whereas the population keeps growing, people keep coming into the working age population group, but we don't see salary jobs growing. We don't see jobs at large growing. So this is a matter of concern.
Do you expect, and you said V-shaped recovery in some other sectors, we've had people sort of shouting from the treetops that don't worry about the GDP numbers, there will be a V-shaped recovery, we will come back. But specifically to do with salary jobs, and do you expect a recovery? Do you expect the next few months to get worse before they get better?
I think salary jobs will get worse. That's my expectation. Because what happened is that there was one shock that happened in April, which is 17 million salary jobs were lost. And when that shock happened, nobody expected jobs to come back. But mind you, in April, we lost 121 million jobs all told. That is on a base of 400 million jobs. It's a very big loss. But the next month, we saw a lot of jobs come back in May and then in June as well. And it looked like a V-shaped recovery. Now, what happened is that those were all daily wage earners, people who, are small hawkers or small tradesmen. They could go back to work, not necessarily earn the same income. Mind you, income has taken a big hit, even for those who have got the jobs back. But the salaried people took the shock a little later. Companies did not tell them they're shutting down. Companies then shut down. People had hopes that although we're not being called to work, maybe there'll be work tomorrow. Maybe salaries are going to come late. So slowly it kind of crept in that in the month of July, we saw 3 million jobs lost. In July, we saw 5 million jobs lost in salaried, and then we saw 3 million additional jobs being lost in the month of August. So what was 17 million jobs lost in the month of April has become 21 million jobs. Now, I think companies were trying to brave it out. They were trying to, weather the storm. All entrepreneurs are fundamentally optimistic. They have to be that. They have to say that all storms can be weathered. And slowly, the realization is coming is that there is no help coming from anywhere. There is no way to easily weather the storm. It is best for us to cut down on labor. It is best for us to cut our losses rather than keep on bleeding. As this happens, the salaried employees are getting hit.
I want to draw your attention to a second graph. This is also from CMIE, which I would like for you to explain to our audience. This is the sort of age-wise breakup of where the losses have been. For our audience that's watching, each bar represents an age group. So you have the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And the worst hit, obviously, bar is number 2 and 3, which is people in their 20s and people in their 30s. Mr. Vyas, why is it that young people have suffered the most, in your opinion?
Well, I think we can interpret this graph in the following manner. So 15 to 19, obviously the graph is small and the number of people of that age who are working is also quite low, and thankfully those people should be still studying. So what matters is people in their 20s. What has happened is that employment grows from this age. So older people start getting out of the labor force and younger people keep coming into the labor force. So I believe that that cohort, that's those set of graduates or high school graduates who came into the labor markets in 2019, say in the summer of 2019, most likely, most of them, more than 50% of them got laid off as soon as the pandemic began. Because when you are still young in the company, you're not trained enough. You don't know everything about the company. You're not as valuable to the company as a person who has got, say, 4 or 5 years of experience and even more years of experience. So the company will tell the younger member of the company to say that, look, you're not very useful, so we'll call you back later on. And that's what has happened to this cohort. The entire cohort has moved up. Many of these people who are relatively younger, mind you, most of the new jobs have been in salary jobs, have mostly been in sales. And the first place you cut is your sales staff. Because a lot of those people will see this hit understandable. Whereas a person who's on the shop floor, the person who's in the production department, is a lot more valuable to the company because the processes of running the operations of the company. So I think it is because of this younger cohort being largely into front offices, largely into places that could be laid off easily, have gone out. It is interesting to note that even the 30s have suffered a serious hit. This is more to do with the MSMEs, which have shut down. They have not been able to bear this loss. And a lot of the people have lost their jobs over there. Whereas people in their 40s have retained their jobs. They're apparently a little more valuable to the company's competitors. compared to the younger people. Now, in the past, say 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we would say that people in their 40s were given what we used to call as the VRS, the voluntary retirement scheme. That's passing. That's not the case. All those people who had to go and VRS have more or less gone out. The remainder are valuable people, is what I understand from this graph.
Mr. Vyas, what happens to the lakhs and lakhs of students who will graduate this year and look for jobs?
Don't ask me such depressing questions. That's really depressing, because the cohort of 2019 has just lost their jobs. 2020 is not going to get jobs. Hopefully 2021 will, when they come out, will jostle for jobs with the cohort of 19 and 20 for very few jobs. What's going to happen to wages at that time? There will be three groups fighting for jobs which are going to be very difficult to get. So I think the future looks extremely bleak, and I just don't like this question being posed to me, because to think of it is so depressing. So I think it's very important for us to brace ourselves for really very grim situation coming up. The only way this can be solved is by the government stepping in really fast to not let the economy slip any further and motivate companies sufficiently to invest and grow the GDP pie so that more jobs can be created.
There have been arguments from within government that this is, I'm quoting, an act of God, and hence government is as helpless as the rest of us, and there's nothing that can be done. Do you believe, first of all, that there is still time for the government to intervene, and what would you expect that intervention to look like?
I heard a wonderful answer from Professor Pranab Sen, and I'll just like to repeat on the show what he said. He said the act of God is the COVID-19 pandemic. The disease is an act of God in this day, but the lockdown wasn't. And the economic meltdown is because of the lockdown, not because of the COVID-19 problem. So we have locked down the economy and therefore brought the economy crashing down. So the crash of the economy is not an act of God. It is the disease which is an act of God, and the rest of it is just our doing. So I think it's important to repair that damage, to get the economy back on rail so the jobs come back. And I probably have lost the second part of your question.
What could the government possibly do at this point? What would you like the intervention to look like?
I think the government needs to spend money. So just look at the numbers, for example. So far in this year, that's till July, till when the numbers are available, the government spending is 11% higher than a year ago. So April to July 2019, they spent a certain amount of money and they have spent 11% more now. This is business as usual. They usually grow by 8 to 10% a year. So even in a year in which we have got really a serious problem on hand, we cannot be having the government spending only 11% year-on-year growth. We require the government to be spending a lot more, and the time for being reticent, for being careful on spending is some other time, not now. The government needs to spend, needs to borrow, and let the economy come back to rates.
Which actually was going to be my next question, that the government has been arguing that there isn't any money. The tax collections have been very low. Obviously, if businesses are shutting down, nobody's making a profit this year, then nobody's paying tax on those non-existent profits. So where would that money to spend then come from?
Well, if you don't do anything, the economy will keep slipping and will get even lesser taxes. So this is the downward spiral. So what do you need to do? There are all bad options, but choose the least bad option. The least bad option is borrow heavy. If necessary, print money. But there is scope. I mean, there is a lot of money sitting with banks which are not getting utilized. Please utilize them. Let the deficit go up and invest into building physical infrastructure, not just roads. We require more hospitals. This is the time to build. Have a 2-year program to say we'll aggressively build primary health centers, hospitals, primary education, more all kinds of infrastructure. Social infrastructure is so important. This is the time to say I'm going to borrow very heavily and start spending. If you do that, then the private sector will follow, because the government is spending, The private sector will know that there is a role to play in this, and as the government and the private sector spend in tandem, we will get more jobs. Those youngsters who have spent their last 4 or 5 years trying to educate themselves with higher education will have some hope back again to say that jobs will be there for them and build a career.
Are you surprised by the level of or the lack of urgency from the government when it comes to do with jobs? Because we haven't really heard anything from the finance ministry since the last sort of package that was announced a couple of months ago, several months ago, in fact.
No, I think the government is not doing enough. So those announcements, which came, mind you, they came in May, Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, whereas the lockdown was announced in March, and it was clear by early April that this lockdown is going to be much longer than the 21 days that the Prime Minister first announced. If that was the case, then I think there was an urgent need for the government to start acting on the economy parallel to saying that we will have to do lockdowns. So people in the government should have put their act together as to how we will ensure that at least in some places, some economic activity will continue. Like you have places that you completely shut down, there should have been places that could have been left open, or alternate ways of employment should have been allowed. I think that planning was completely missing. Now, as the lockdown is getting lifted, it is as if merely lifting the lockdown will repair the damage done. That's not enough. We're required to think really urgently that the government needs to spend money. The private sector is not going to spend money in the current conditions. No real investments will come in unless the government puts in money. I think that thinking is lacking.
And under the circumstance that the government doesn't spend the money and doesn't intervene, what are we possibly looking at?
Complete disaster. We can see the situation slipping even further. What can solve the problem? So if the economy has shrunk by, let us say, 24% or so in the first quarter, some pent-up demand will come back in the second quarter. A little bit will come back. But then incomes have shrunk. We've just got a little, so, we say that 121 million jobs lost. But when I look at the first quarter's employment numbers, according to us, employment was down 20% in the first quarter, April, May, June. That's the period when GDP shrunk by 24%. But as I said earlier, the hit is bigger on the income side. And our guess is that in the month, we have got some data which tells us that the income in the month of April shrunk by of the order of 55 to 60%. Household incomes. This recovered a little bit in May, but I think the shrinking, if the income has shrunk by around even 40%, then where will the demand come? The pent-up demand will come up to some extent in the second quarter, third, fourth quarter. Nothing is going to save us. The government has spent money for Manrega already, but that's coming down. So unless it promises to and really spends more money, there is no solution.
That's actually a really scary idea, because going into the festive season, Ganesh Puja is over, Onam is over, we now have Dussehra and Diwali to look forward to. If people are making half as much as they were making before the lockdown, then they're not going to spend any money during this period. And I can tell you that this is the period where businesses expect to sell the most. This is the period where the most amount of money circulates in our economy. And if that doesn't happen, more of us will lose our jobs, because there'll be no expansion. In fact, there'll be contraction, jobs will be cut. So especially to the graduates who are, and my heart really goes out to these young people who are looking for jobs, hoping to pay off their education loans, hoping to contribute to their parents' income. It's going to be a very, very difficult time, what one might describe as a character building experience, really, and surely once in a lifetime, but unfortunately, you caught that knife while it was falling. You did also say that we'll have more and more people competing for a smaller number of jobs, and that effectively makes it an employer's market, because employees can no longer call the shots and demand benefits and things like that. At an environment, at a point like this, we understand the government is looking to change some of the labor laws in Parliament in this session. Do you find that concerning as someone who's watching jobs right now?
At least what some state governments did was not a very good idea, which is to keep all labor laws at bay. I think that is clearly counterproductive. The government has been talking about coming out with a new set of labor laws. Some of these have come out, but I don't think we are addressing the real question on the problems that industry faces with respect to labor. I think it's important to have. I think the important elements over here is that labor markets need to be a little more freer, in the sense that while it should be possible for industry to reduce the manpower it has on hand, it also needs to be responsible to ensure that there is a reasonably good severance pay also given to people who they lay out. So I don't think we are thinking about severance pay at all. So I think this whole thing is caught up into saying, let there be hire fire. So if you say, let there be hire fire, there also needs to be a safety net for labor. Both need to work out, and I think that's not working out as yet.
You also, Mr. Vyas, in your articles quoted the fact that by August 2020, we understand employment in farming is going to increase by 14 million people who are going to, because they've lost their jobs in the cities, go back to farming. And we already have 111 million people already in farming not making enough money. Farming, to put it very simply, is a loss-making business. Once a farmer tills the land, gets his harvest, and goes and sells it, he doesn't have a profit at the end of it. He's barely breaking even. Farming is a loss-making business that is now employing 14 million more people. How dangerous is that?
I must say that farming is loss-making when it does not have scale. But farming done at a reasonable scale, and particularly in horticulture and in some plantation crops, as well as some cash crops, is reasonably profitable. The problem is...
But if I may, forgive me, if I may, I'm coming from a farming family myself, plantation crops, cash crops, horticulture is really the job of rich landlords. But when we talk about people who've lost their job as a watchman or as a security guard in the city and has gone back to the family land in the village, he's not growing coffee or tea. He's going to grow tomatoes.
I agree with you. So we have got clarity now. So if you're doing horticulture, you're doing cash crops, you're not too bad. But those people who are smaller farmers are making losses. Okay, and the people who were, let's say, security guards and lost their jobs and went back to their villages, they mostly were doing the subsistence kind of farming or the very, growing rice and wheat kind of things. Now, this is worrying, or this is actually a clear indication that when these kind of farming jobs are going up, it only means that we are seeing disguised unemployment over there. It's the same output, it's the same income, and there are just more hands to it. Now, this is not really additional employment at all. The problem is, see, there's also another problem. We've also seen an increase in the number of entrepreneurs in recent times. What is this? Daily wage laborers and entrepreneurs. So you had a small shop which was run by your father. Now you have lost the job that you had in the close by workshop. You go and sit in that shop and you say, I'm an entrepreneur. So these are disguised unemployments which are showing up in these places. What matters most is therefore the country to grow salaried jobs, proper good salaried jobs. It's a shame that 70 years after independence, only 20% or 25% of our jobs are salaried jobs. The rest of them are all informal and unorganized jobs. So farming is not the only case. All of the jobs are equally not organized and very, very informal.
Well, the government has had some success with Manrega in rural India. We understand it's shown a spike, an improvement, let's say, I would say a spike, an improvement in rural employment numbers because the government is spending money giving people daily wage work in rural India. Do you believe an urban extension of that, where people who are unemployed in urban India are contracted to fix the roads, to build hospitals like you were talking about, an urban Manrega might actually also deliver success?
It's a good short-term solution. But I would like to say that, Manrega is often seen, and that's what the role was of Manrega, is to provide solution to rural folks who don't have at least 100 days of job in a year. So it's a relief measure. And similarly, you can do a corresponding relief measure in urban India. That's perfectly fine. But why do we look at government spending only as relief measure? Isn't urban India still very, very short on government services? Do we have sufficient policemen in the city? Do we have sufficient security in the city at large? Do we have sufficient all kinds of services, even a primary health center or education centers? Or are the sewages and the rest of the city kept clean enough? Are these manned sufficiently enough? Why is the government shy of hiring more people as regular staff in urban India to give us better services? So I think there is a need for the government to hire a lot more people on a regular, sustained basis compared to what they're giving us now. Their services are woefully short. It's not only an efficiency problem, it's also a manning problem. They're just not trained enough.
Yes. In fact, a recent report showed that police forces across the country function at an average of 77% and not more than that, which shows that, there's at least, there's 25% jobs or vacancies that have not been filled by state governments because they just haven't decided to spend that money, and that's the only factor there. Mr. Vyas, thank you so much for speaking with me and helping us understand this situation. It's obviously very worrying. I do know there are a lot of young people across the country who, like you said, are bearing the brunt right now, are hoping to see some silver lining or light at the end of this tunnel because, like you said, it's a worrying and a depressing question for young people. So we hope that the government does something so that young people can have their jobs back. Mr. Mahesh Vyas, thank you.
Thank you.